In 1610, Maria de Zazoya confessed to murdering 840 people. The problem? She couldn't possibly have killed a single one of them. The confession was forced, extracted by a machine so cruelly precise it turned the human body into its own instrument of torment. The screams bounced off stone. A woman hung from ropes, her body shaking. Beneath her, a wooden stool held a metal pyramid, too blunt to kill quickly, sharp enough to turn flesh into an unending source of pain. This was the Judas Cradle. By the end of this video, you'll understand 3 things that will stay with you. First, the geometric design that weaponized gravity, making bodies betray themselves. Second, why victims survive for days in unspeakable agony, and why that was exactly the point. Third, the confession that accidentally exposed a fatal flaw in Europe's torture system and changed legal history forever. Before we descend into this nightmare, hit subscribe, because at the 8-minute mark, I reveal a single detail from the archives so disturbing it will change how you think about justice. Now rewind with me to 1478 Spain. The Judas Cradle wasn't the work of anonymous dungeon sadists. It was authored in palace offices. In 1478, Ferdinand and Isabella created the Spanish Inquisition, not a mob, but a bureaucracy. Clerks, registers, protocols. They had budgets and procedures. They also had a problem. Execution by fire worked too well. A condemned heretic burned quickly, sometimes within minutes. Quick deaths meant no time for confessions, no time to name co-conspirators, no long public example to terrify a populace. So the Inquisition's engineers, yes, they had engineers, went to work. Their brief read like a perverse design brief: keep the victim alive as long as possible. Inflict escalating agony without leaving immediate grotesque marks. And let the victim's own weight operate the device automatically. The solution? The Judas Cradle, named for history's ultimate betrayer because it made everyone betray someone: friends, family, themselves. The logic of the time even called it merciful, compared to immolation. The argument went, the cradle granted days to confess and reconcile with God. Within decades, its design spread across Europe, Italy, Germany, France, not by conquest but by endorsement. Inquisitors exchanged letters praising its efficiency, its psychological power, the confessions it produced. So what made it so terrifyingly effective? 3 design features. The first will make your skin crawl. Imagine you're an Inquisition engineer in 1480, tasked with designing pain that never ends. You begin with geometry. The Judas Cradle's pyramid tip was usually 4 to 6 inches tall, made of wood or metal, mounted on a sturdy stool. Crucially, the tip wasn't needle-thin. A razor point would cut too fast and cause fatal injury in hours. Instead, the designers chose a bluntly tapered pyramid, sharp enough to concentrate pressure, dull enough to avoid immediate penetration. The angle and surface area were calculated to apply relentless, localized pressure without catastrophic rupture. Contemporary manuals, including the Directorium Inquisitorium and physician notes, laid out the parameters. The point had to press, not pierce. Vital organs must be avoided. The machine must use the victim's body weight as force. The accused, stripped naked, were hoisted by ropes attached to their wrists. Guards then lowered them, inch by inch, until the pyramid pressed against the anus, vagina, or tailbone. A constant downforce, roughly the weight of the body, focused onto an area smaller than a coin. But diagrams don't show what the medical accounts do. When the human body is subjected to sustained, concentrated pressure like that, it goes into survival mode. Muscles clench automatically, trying to lift the body away from the pain. Your legs tremble. Your abdomen locks. For an hour, maybe 2, adrenaline and sheer will let you hold part of your weight up and reduce the pressure. You feel in control, and then the math takes over. Muscle fatigue is non-negotiable. No matter how hard you fight, your muscles deplete. Gravity, by contrast, is patient. It never tires. As lactic acid builds and tendons tremble, the body surrenders an inch at a time. Each tiny descent increases pressure. Calm becomes panic. Pain becomes impossible to bear. The victim's own weight transforms the pyramid from object to engine of torment. Slow, inevitable, precise. That slow, mechanical agony was the point. Confession was not a byproduct, it was the goal. The longer the suffering, the more brittle the mind, the more willing to name names, to fabricate details, to implicate innocence just to halt the descent. Maria de Zazoya's impossible tally, 840 murders, is the grotesque arithmetic of a device that could make a person betray reality itself. And yet, as we'll see later in the video, that very precision carried a fatal legal flaw. One confession that exposed the apparatus for what it was and forced courts to question the value of coerced truth. But that revelation belongs to the next segment. For now, remember this: the Judas Cradle was not crude cruelty. It was calculated engineering, a design that turned geometry, physiology, and gravity into a machine whose only output was confession. If you want the full archival quote that finally cracked the Inquisition's case, stay with me. It changes everything. As your muscles fail, you sink lower. Pressure intensifies. Pain sharpens into something relentless, inescapable. You try shifting weight, hoping to ease it, but every movement tears tissue faster. The cradle rocks with each tiny motion, a sickening, soaring rhythm. Survivors would later say the worst wasn't the physical penetration. It was the knowledge that sleep meant death. One faint, one collapse, and your full weight would crush you into the pyramid below. Hours stretch into days. Guards sometimes added weights to ankles, or yanked the ropes to force sudden drops, only to catch you again. Every second became layered torment, anticipation entwined with agony. Every angle, every rope, every geometric calculation was standardized across Europe. But here's the true horror. The physical pain wasn't the endgame. The real nightmare began after 3 days on the cradle, when the body teetered on the edge of life and death, begging not for release, but for something far worse. The Judas Cradle wasn't designed for swift execution. It was designed for slow, systematic destruction. And biology played its part. Let's break down what happens to a human body subjected to this nightmare. Why didn't they just die? Historical physician accounts from the Bamberg witch trials, 1627-1632, detail it in chilling precision. These weren't sadists writing fantasy. They were doctors observing reality. Hours 1 to 6. Shock. Adrenaline and cortisol surge. Pain receptors fire without pause. Survivors described a dissociation, as if watching their own torment from outside. Heart rate spikes to 120-140 BPM. Hyperventilation sets in. Microtears form in tissue, but nothing fatal yet. Hours 6 to 24. Breaking point. Muscle fatigue overwhelms any resistance. Your full weight now presses down. Tissue begins to tear and crush. Blood flow is compromised but not halted. Nerves scream. Physicians describe this agony as all-consuming, not stabbing, not sharp, but an endless, burning, crushing pain that never relents. You are alive, still conscious, still aware. Days 2 to 3. Infection. The genius or horror of the cradle reveals itself. Wounds from prolonged pressure become entry points for bacteria. Fecal matter, unwashed wood or metal, pooled fluids, all invite sepsis. Fever spikes. Delirium sets in. Sepsis kills in 3 to 7 days. The Inquisitors knew this. They weren't executing. They were timing torment to extract every confession, every name, every betrayal. Add sleep deprivation. 48 hours without rest in unceasing agony. Your mind fractures. Hallucinations blur reality. Shadows take form. Voices merge with memories. Nightmares intertwine with questioning. Prisoners confess to anything, not merely because pain breaks the body, but because the mind cannot separate reality from interrogator-induced fantasy. Physicians documented a 3-stage psychological progression. Stage 1, resistance and denial. Victims maintain innocence, pray, plead. Stage 2, bargaining and partial confessions. They admit minor heresies, offer something to end torment. Stage 3, total collapse. They confessed to anything suggested, even impossibilities, which brings us to Maria de Zazoya. Her stage 3 confession was so absurd, so impossible, it exposed a fatal flaw in Europe's entire torture apparatus, a flaw that would change legal history forever. Her case began like thousands of others, an accusation of witchcraft, an arrest, and a rendezvous with the pyramid. But what she confessed to in Logroño, Spain in 1610 was beyond belief. Maria de Zazoya is 52 years old, a midwife, a healer, and a widow. Her only crime? A jealous neighbor accused her of witchcraft, claiming Maria's evil eye had cursed her crops. Standard procedure followed: arrest, interrogation, and when she refused to confess, torture. They placed her on the Judas Cradle on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, after 30 hours of unbroken torment, Maria began to talk, and for 6 hours straight she didn't stop. Her confession, still preserved in the Logroño Inquisition archives, runs 47 pages long. Here are just 3 translated lines. I confess to attending Sabbaths on 214 occasions over 12 years, where I murdered 840 children by mixing toad venom with their mother's milk. And I flew to these gatherings on a goat provided by the devil himself, who appeared as a man with eyes of fire. 840 children, in a town of barely 3,000. The math alone is absurd. That's 70 dead children a year, more than one every single week, in a village where everyone knew each other, where one missing child would have set off a panic. And yet, no one noticed. But the real proof that this was fantasy lay in the church records. Parish death registers from Logroño during those 12 years showed perfectly normal childhood mortality, 12 to 15 per year from illness and accident. The 840 murdered children Maria described simply never existed. Still, the inquisitors wrote it all down. They accepted every word. They prepared to execute her, until one man dared to ask a forbidden question. His name was Alonso de Salazar Frias, a young inquisitor sent to review the Basque witch trials. He read Maria's testimony, then dozens of others like it. Women confessing to flying through the air, shape-shifting, attending impossible gatherings in faraway fields on the same nights they were proven to be at home with family. Salazar did the unthinkable. He investigated. He visited the towns listed in confessions, checked parish birth and death records, interviewed witnesses, cross-referenced every timeline, and what he found shattered the entire legal foundation of torture in Europe. Every single confession obtained through torture contained impossibilities, contradictions, violations of geography, time and physics, and yet they were all accepted as truth, because they came with a confession. But here's the part history books rarely mention. Salazar couldn't free the prisoners. The system wouldn't let him. Maria de Zazoya died of infection 3 weeks after her confession, still in custody, never tried, never buried properly. But Salazar left behind something that would outlive them all: a report. A calm, methodical dismantling of torture itself as a means of investigation. In 1612, he presented it to Spain's Supreme Council, ending with this single devastating line: there were neither witches nor bewitched, until they were talked and written about. In other words, torture doesn't reveal truth. It manufactures it, the council agreed. Shockingly, they issued new rules restricting torture in witchcraft cases. Salazar's report spread across Europe. One by one, courts began citing his findings. And the use of the Judas Cradle, the so-called merciful device, began to fade. Slowly, reluctantly, but measurably, Maria's impossible confession, born from delirium and agony on a wooden pyramid, had exposed the fatal flaw of Europe's darkest system. Torture never produced evidence, only obedience. But the cradle didn't vanish completely, because 172 years later, in 1782, it resurfaced one final time. Its last victim would mark the end of an era and the death of a superstition. Her name was Anna Göldi, Europe's final witch, June 13th, 1782. Glarus, Switzerland. Anna is 48, a domestic servant for a physician named Johann Jakob Tschudi. One morning, Tschudi's 8-year-old daughter begins convulsing, vomiting, claiming she found needles in her milk. Her father accuses Anna of witchcraft. She's arrested immediately, and here's what makes her case so haunting. It's 1782. The Enlightenment is in full bloom. Voltaire has been dead only 4 years. The American Revolution has just ended. Europe is supposed to be the age of reason, of science, of human rights. Yet in one small Swiss valley, superstition still held more power than truth, and the Judas Cradle was waiting one last time. And yet, in 1782, decades into the Age of Enlightenment, Anna Goldie stood before a court, formally accused of making a pact with the devil, a domestic servant, a healer, a woman condemned not by monsters, but by men in powdered wigs and black robes, determined to extract one last confession. The sentence: torture. They brought out the Judas Cradle, according to trial transcripts preserved in the Glarus archives, records you can still read today. Anna was subjected to the cradle for roughly 18 hours across 2 sessions. The documents use cold, mechanical language. The accused was positioned on the implement, according to traditional procedure. Traditional procedure. In 1782, after the second session, delirious from infection and exhaustion, Anna finally broke. She confessed that the devil appeared to her as a black dog with burning eyes. She admitted to poisoning her employer's daughter's milk with needles blessed by demons. And just like that, the sentence was sealed: death. But this time, something different happened. News of the trial spread, not just across Switzerland, but across all of Europe. Newspapers in Germany, France, and England printed headlines in disbelief. The same philosophers who had been writing about reason, liberty, and human rights suddenly had a test case that shattered their ideals. Letters poured in. The Swiss government in Bern received petitions demanding intervention. Legal scholars wrote furious essays pointing out that confessions extracted under torture had been discredited for decades. But the local court in Glarus refused to bend, and so, on June 13, 1782, in the town square, Anna Goldie, Europe's final witch, was publicly beheaded, but her death became a spark. The backlash was immediate. Within weeks, the Swiss Confederation launched an investigation into the Glarus court. Judges were formally censured, and the outrage rippled outward. Emperor Joseph II of Austria, watching from Vienna, issued the Penal Code of 1787, abolishing torture across the entire Habsburg Empire. France followed soon after in 1789. The dominoes began to fall, but here's the part most people never hear. The Judas Cradle, that obscene pyramid of suffering, wasn't destroyed. Many were quietly preserved. Today you can still find them behind glass, in the Medieval Crime Museum in Rothenburg, in Vienna's Museum of Torture, and in private European collections, and the one believed to have been used on Anna herself. It's rumored to rest in the Swiss National Museum, locked away from the public. Too disturbing to display, too real to destroy, it still exists. A wooden monument to the moment humanity crossed a line, and then vowed never to cross it again. Anna's execution, the last legal torture for witchcraft in Europe, didn't just end an era. It started a movement. The outrage over her death laid the groundwork for centuries of reform, culminating in the Geneva Conventions of 1949, the laws that formally banned torture worldwide, from an instrument of pain to a catalyst for human rights, from a pyramid of horror to a symbol of why we must never forget. Let's put this in perspective. Over 3 centuries, from the 1470s to 1782, historians estimate the Judas Cradle was used on at least 5,000 recorded victims across Europe. The real number was likely far higher. Lost in ashes and silence, 5,000 human beings, each enduring days of agony, all because of geometry, mathematics, and a system that turned cruelty into protocol. But here's the most terrifying truth of all. The cradle wasn't built by monsters. It was built by people, bureaucrats, priests, engineers, who believed they were protecting society, who thought they were saving souls, who convinced themselves that necessary suffering was righteous. That's the real danger. Torture doesn't require evil. It only requires ordinary people who believe the ends justify the means. And when we start saying enhanced, interrogation, or special measures, or for the greater good, we are standing on the edge of that pyramid all over again. The Judas Cradle's victims, Maria de Zazoya, Anna Göldi, and thousands more, brought us a promise with their suffering: never again. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about it. Should museums still display these torture devices? On one hand, they're powerful educational tools, tangible proof of what happens when fear replaces reason. Seeing the real wood, the real iron, the exact geometry that destroyed lives, it makes history impossible to deny. But on the other hand, should these things remain hidden, relics too cruel for public eyes? Tell me what you think in the comments. Because if history teaches us anything, it's this: the moment we forget the past, we start rebuilding it.